Welcome to the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast, where we hope to inspire you to embrace your God-given gifts, skills, and passions in order to lead with confidence. We want you to remember that you are fearfully and wonderfully made in the image of God, and you are fully loved by Him.
You have been designed on purpose by God with unique gifts and passions in order to love and lead those around you. I'm your host, Esther Littlefield, a pastor's wife, business owner, mom, and writer.
And I'm Esther's co-host, Holly Kane. I'm a wife, mom, and business owner. I also write at hollykane.org, where I focus on my passion for women's ministry.
Together, we chat about important issues that Christian women leaders face. In addition, we interview other women just like you who lead in various roles, from church to community to business. Through this podcast, we offer you encouragement, tools, and resources to help you on your leadership journey. We are so glad you're here with us. Hi, friend, and welcome to episode 105 of the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast. I am so happy you are here with me today. This week, I'm excited to bring you an episode with our friend, Kristen Joy, all about finding hope and healing after experiencing hurt in ministry leadership. But before I get into that, I want to tell you a couple exciting things that are happening around here. One is that I recently launched a podcast for Christian women business owners and content creators. This new podcast is designed for anyone who is working to build an audience or a business online, and especially for those of you who want practical, down-to-earth advice from someone who has personal experience and is actually in the trenches with you right now. It's called the Christian Woman Business Podcast. Yes, I know, really creative. I decided to just keep it simple and keep the name pretty similar to this podcast name, except with the word business. So be sure to head over there, check out the show, take a listen, and if it's of interest, go ahead and subscribe. And this will be helpful for you if you are a writer, a speaker, a podcaster, or you're an online business owner and you're looking to grow and expand your impact from a faith-based perspective, from the perspective of shining the light of Jesus online. The second exciting thing is that in July, we are celebrating 2 years of this podcast, and we're doing something a little bit different, and it's going to be a lot of fun, and I'm excited to tell you more. But one of the things we're going to be doing is in a few weeks, we are going to give you a chance to ask Holly and I questions. So on our actual anniversary episode, we would love for you to be able to ask us a question, and Holly and I will answer it. So the way you can do that is just click the link in the show notes to send us a voice message, and you can ask us any question you want. We're keeping the options wide open, and we will do our best to answer as many questions as we can on our anniversary episode. Now, I'm really excited for you to hear the episode today with Kristen Joy. She is sharing her personal journey of walking through a very difficult season as a pastor's wife. And in addition, she is providing us with the insights and lessons that she learned during that season of healing. She also talks about dealing with unmet expectations. And if you're a leader or you're in ministry, you know that's a part of ministry life is unmet expectations. We also talk about one of the most important aspects of leadership life, which is boundaries. And we talk about how churches can improve in the area of hiring and firing and the processes that they have in place. So I hope you will enjoy this conversation as much as Holly and I did. If you want the details of all the links we talk about and how to connect with Kristen, head over to estherlittlefield.com/episode 105, and that's where you'll find the information. So let's go ahead and dive into our conversation with Kristen. Well, welcome, Kristen, to the show. We are so happy to have you with us today.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. It's an honor.
Well, can you get us started by just telling us a little bit about what your life and leadership looks like right now?
Sure. So right now, I am actually just in Wisconsin, currently out of ministry for a little bit and looking to get back in it. That's a process. And so I have 6 kiddos from ages 4 to 16, and some are in school, some are homeschooled, just doing a variety of things. I am coaching and I lead a Facebook group that is for women who have walked the road of forced resignation through ministry. And so, unfortunately, that's a growing group. And I say unfortunately because every woman that comes or messages me and I hear her story, my heart breaks for the pain that she is enduring. So the wonderful thing about that ministry is that I get to see the other side and I get to see the joy and the healing that takes place. And we have several women who are getting back into ministry. And so walking that road with them actually is a great joy.
That's so important. I'm so glad that you're filling that hole out there. I'd love for you to kind of rewind us back a little bit and tell us a little bit about your leadership journey, sort of how you got to where you are now.
Sure. So I grew up as a pastor's kid, and I think I had a really positive experience as a pastor's kid. I know that many don't, but my dad took time to invest in us in things that we were interested in. He saw our sports activities and our musicals, whatever. There were definitely things that he didn't, wasn't able to be at for meetings and such, but that is probably every child's experience with their father. And so in high school, I took several missions trips, which really propelled me into being interested in missions further. And in college, I ended up majoring in music and minoring in Spanish. And my dream, I thought I was going to marry, someone in the ministry, and I would lead all the short-term missions trips, and we'd live happily ever after. I did marry someone in the ministry, but I have yet to lead a short-term missions trip out of that. So still waiting to check that box off. But yeah, as a leader, I think that the things that have shaped me the most probably have been those dreams and those experiences that I did have with the missions trips, with leading Bible studies and retreats and leading several different women's groups through leadership processes. So developing a women's ministry or developing a mom's ministry. And in seminary, when we returned to seminary mid-pastoral years, there was a seminary wives group that was non-existent. It used to be active and was just laying low. And after having been in ministry, I just really knew the importance of what that was going to be like for women who were there going forward. And so I knew that this was the moment to capitalize on, that this was our time to create a group that was that safe place, that going forward, we would always be able to rely on those relationships no matter what trials were ahead of us and challenges, that we could go to one another and we could be each other's prayer support. And I didn't know what to do in this situation. She could give me, wise advice. And so I saw the importance of that seminary wives group and revived it and was able to hand that off, which for me, a good leader, that's their goal. What can we do? What can we do well to serve? And then how can we transition out of that well and leave it to the next set of people, whomever they may be?
Right. Yeah. So I'm curious if you always considered yourself a leader, or was there a certain point in your life when you recognized that you are a leader?
I think honestly, I would like to be able to say that I didn't know I was a leader. That feels more selfless in some way to me. But honestly, I hit college, and from there, knowing that I was ministry minded, knowing my personality and makeup, like I wanted to lead. And so I think unfortunately, I didn't study leadership very well when I was young. And the expectation that I think I brought to the table was my position equaled leadership. And that's just not the case. It's not the right expectation either, I don't believe, now that I look back. And so there were definitely lots of mistakes along the way.
Well, you're definitely in a safe space here. We have lots of leaders who knew from very young that that's what they were, I don't want to say destined, but that's what they were made to do. So you're in a safe place here. We have lots of hashtag or quote unquote bossy little girls. So you're safe here.
Very good. Very good.
So you have a heart for the hurting leader. Could you tell us a little bit about why you want to provide support for leaders who are hurting?
Yeah, so that's quite a big question, actually. But let me go back a little bit. I want to give proper attention to this answer, but I don't want it to be too lengthy. So when I was 13, I was a pastor's kid, and my parents came to us and announced that we were going to be moving. Dad was going to plant a church in a town that was about an hour away. And I was 13. I had lived in this location since I was 4. So it's all I knew. And that was very surprising, upsetting. Now, I love new challenges. I love new things. I can tend to be kind of a disconnected person. So I did struggle with leaving my best friend. But other than that, I felt like at the time I was pretty resilient and came into it like, okay, this is what we're doing. And I did not recognize any long-lasting impact of that. However, fast forward and I'm in ministry myself and feeling the tensions of what that looked like. And then through the years, I had picked up bits and pieces of things that weren't necessarily, 1 and 1 was not equaling 2. And I had learned that there was a false accusation against my dad and that he had decided, instead of calling for a vote that he knew was going to split the church, that he would resign and find new ministry and walk this other path, which he loved doing. I mean, he was a good church planter and he did that well. And so knowing that in my 20s gave me a different perspective of what had actually been going on. We were in ministry for 5 years before going to seminary. During seminary, we were there for 4 years, my husband was a pastor, preached on the weekends with a small country church so that he could keep growing in those skills. And then we went into another ministry afterwards. And we sensed that I think some leaders struggle with insecurity. And so on a pastoral team, how we have seen that play out, and I think this could be applicable to any organizational structure, is that if someone who is the actual, head senior pastor, let's say in a ministry position, and they're the insecure person, if there's something positive happening to I don't think they're unequal, but oftentimes it's looked at as unequal in the church realm, to an associate or a youth pastor, whatever it may be, that's a little lower, the senior pastor can make choices that feel actually in his best interest. And so we started experiencing things such as people would come and ask my husband for advice or for help, or what do we do here? And it was a church-related thing. And we sensed that the senior pastor was insecure about that. He started taking more and more tasks that were related to my husband's job away from him. And that sucked the life out of what he had been doing. All of the responsibilities that he had brought joy to him and infused life into him. And so the more and more those things were taken away, it caused frustration. So we decided that ourselves also had just kind of come to the point where we didn't want to cause division in the church. We didn't want to cause a comparison of, he's better than this and he's better at this or whatever. So we had started looking for another ministry position. We were actually candidating. Of course, we had told them we were on vacation because you don't tell your church you're candidating when you're currently hired. But on that trip, one of the elders called us and said, "We fired the senior pastor. Will you come back and be pastor?" And
wow.
We were shocked. There were no biblical grounds for it. It was simply personality. And that is just not a reason to remove a pastor.
Yeah.
So we came back, we were shocked, And my husband considered taking that position, but something in me hit a switch. And I said, I can't do it. I don't want to be at a church that will fire their pastor for no reason. There's just no biblical grounds. And so we decided to keep looking, and never in a million years would I have thought that 2.5 years down the road, we would have been in the same place. So.
Wow. Wow. So you went through that experience. You did find another church, it sounds like, or were offered a different position.
Yeah,
you want to
we
tell
did.
us more about that?
Sure. So again, something I never thought in a million years I would have done. There was a church in the community that we had kind of exchanged different ministries here and there. And so we'd worked with a lot of the people from there. We knew them well. We had relationships and friendships with some of them. I taught music to children that were in that church, and we had watched them grow up. And so they came and said, we really would like you to consider this position. We know that our pastor is going to be retiring in so many years in the future, and we'd like you to be the pastor after him. Okay, so we walked through that. There were a couple red flags. My own father was going through the retirement process, and that's a tricky one. I think it's a tricky one, again, in any organizational structure, when that person that's been their stability is going to leave. It is difficult to make that transition well. But we were excited. We loved the people. We agreed with their theological standpoints. And we felt like, man, all those years that you spend in the beginning of ministry making relationships, we don't have to worry about that. However, I did know for me, I had been seeking counseling just for all the things that I think were probably piling up inside of me. And I probably made at least 2 to 3 phone calls to various counseling places around. We were not in a financial position that I could come up with. The average was usually about 160 that was said to me. I just couldn't come up with that. And so that was another thing. This is kind of a complete side note, but in leadership, there's got to be a way to take that obstacle away for ministry families. And at the time, I wasn't aware of organizations who were helping in that regard. This was 10 years ago when I first started looking, maybe a little bit more than that now. And even Googling things then was not quite as popular. And so I think now you can much more readily find that. And I definitely, that's one of my joys, is to be able to hand out resources like that and let people know of places that can do that now. But at the time, I didn't have that. And so all the little frustrations for me, I wasn't attending to, and I wasn't healing. And it was causing great wounds, to be there. And I remember talking with one of my friends who was in the new church we went to. And I said, man, I'm worried. I said, I'm broken. And I'm afraid the first time I do something wrong, say something wrong, don't live up to your expectations, what's going to happen? And she said, we're going to love you. We're going to forgive you. And we're going to move on. And that just wasn't the case. So.
Wow. So tell us how you said you got to the same place where you never expected you were going to be 2.5 years later. If you want to share with us how that happened, or even after the fact, what that looked like.
Sure. Well, it was probably 4 months that we were at this church, and we started seeing some definite concerns and started praying like, Lord, work in this area, work in this area. We're not sure what's going on here. We discovered that they had a history of, I think we counted 5 youth pastors that had been through there in maybe 10 years. And that's pretty fast turnover. And we did not know that prior to going. We saw some sin issues in the church, and we did meet with leadership regarding those. And they looked at us, and the words they said were, well, this is just us. I remember getting into our car after a particular meeting with 3 of the elders in which we had said, look, this family group and this family group and this family group, key family groups, they have generational issues that have not been dealt with. And we need forgiveness here. We need repentance and humility. And that was their response. This is just who we are.
Mm.
So when we got in the car, I looked at my husband and I said, what are we going to do? Like, this is not right. I don't know how to fix this. And it's very ingrained. And so this was a church of about 250, but it was rural Midwest. And I will tell you, just again, like other organizational structures, they're characters in a book. You can just about say this, and this. Even the situation with retiring pastors, it's going to go one way or the other.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have fallout, or you're going to have been successful. And usually success, from what I've seen, requires a lot of humility and a lot of giving up your own agenda and seeking out the best interest, rather than what I've seen that's destructive is your pride, wanting to see your church be what you want it to be, or it's meeting some power need in your own soul. So that was about 6 months prior. And I remember going home and I started praying, Lord, whatever you have to do, get us out of here. Because there were so many toxic things, and my husband was just stressed all the time, wasn't taking care of his own needs, did not have good boundaries in place. And so it was all a recipe for disaster. He was very well loved in the community, umpire and sports leader and coach. And so the whole community was very shocked when this happened. We had several things in our own personal family, extended family, happen that were super stressful. One was dealing with a divorce in an extended family. Another was actually a mental health crisis in another family area. And so we were in the middle of dealing with that. Our own truck had just had a transmission and trying to figure out what to do with that. That was lost. And so that very same week that my husband was actually at the office trying to deal with some details having to do with this mental health crisis. And there was a problem. I wasn't there, so I can't say, but an altercation that was surrounding probably a key issue, remodeling, right? That's another big, a remodeling situation. And so some women approached him, and I think he snapped. I have no idea what he said. I've never heard my husband swear. He has raised his voice twice in our home, but I wasn't there, so I can't say what happened. And the next day, I do know he called, and the woman that he had this interaction with, he brought her in and her husband in and had a really good conversation with them. In fact, he came home from lunch that day and said, honey, I think, like, I really sensed in their soul that things were healed. They have forgiven me and we can move on. But someone took that for their opportunity, and we have no idea. We have no idea why or what we did. We just know there was an email sent from someone who observed the altercation, and she said, I'm not coming to church if he's pastor. And that's all it took. So we lived about a mile from the church. We could see it. And we saw there started being, Thursday night, there were a bunch of cars there. Of course, who's, the elders' cars look like. And the next night there were cars there. And we were like, something is not right here. And on Saturday morning, they called him and said, can you come in and talk with us? And I said, I am going. Like, I don't care. I'm going too. And they wouldn't even let me in the room. So it was him and 20 plus people. They never asked him his story. He walked in, and on the other side of the door, I heard them say, well, we're sorry. You'll need to get your stuff. You're done.
Oh, wow.
And as terrible as it is, because it is awful, what I learned was that this is actually really common. I have since met a woman, Deanna Harrison. She runs Pastors Hope Network. And this network is specifically serving pastors who have walked this road. Oftentimes, they will let you resign, but they'll say, you can resign, but you can't talk about it or you don't get severance. This is very common. I've talked to 2 women in the last month that have signed legal gag orders not to talk to anybody. And I think that's one of the most painful parts about it is the secrecy, and there's no opportunity to defend yourself, to ask any questions. It's just over. And so that, for mental health's sake, is really dangerous.
So I would love to know if during this point, you mentioned Pastors Hope Network, was there any point during this process that you were able to get help for yourself? You had talked about the fact that you just couldn't make it work at one point, but was there a point when you were able to actually get the help that you needed to kind of walk through this?
Yeah. So the really wonderful thing is that the week leading up to this Saturday that they dismissed us, on Monday, I don't have visions, but I had a vision. I was making a snack for kids, and I saw Jesus so vividly hanging on the cross that I had to grab the counter.
Mm.
I wanted to fall to my knees, and what came out of my mouth was, I am not worthy. I did not know why I saw that. I thought it was the weirdest thing and very random. On Wednesday, I had been teaching my children science at home. We had some that were homeschool and some that were private schooled at the time as well. And it was almost as if God's voice was audible, and he said, read Joseph. I stopped teaching and I looked up, and the kids were like, what's wrong, Mom? I said, I don't know. And then I started trying to do science again, and I heard it again, like, read Joseph. I just said, guys, I got to go read Joseph. And so I did. I was like, okay, Lord, where is Joseph even again in the Bible? I mean, like, I was so kind of like, this is so weird. What's going on? But I found it. And I read his whole story. I just sat and read, and I thought, I have no idea why I'm reading this. The altercation had not happened yet. And so I had no idea. Thursday, the same thing happened. And I started thinking, what is the Lord doing? And on Friday, the same thing. It was like, Kristen, go read Joseph. I didn't even argue that day. I did kind of argue on Thursday. But on Friday, I just read it, and I thought, I think I'm going to need to know this man well.
Mm. Mm.
So that was actually the beginning of healing.
Yeah.
Was before it even happened. And within 6 weeks, we had moved our family to a new state. We had taken kids out of school. We had just upended their entire world. I remember my then 12-year-old son saying, this is the only home I've known, as we were driving away.
Yeah.
And the impact on your mama's heart is like, Lord, don't do this. But at the same time, I was thrilled. And I thought, don't pray prayers like, Lord, do whatever it takes. I did not mean this, Lord. This is painful. But
yeah,
it took about 9 months after we moved for me to I had started calling counseling places to find out some counseling prior, but had not really made it a priority, had not really jumped in and said, I'm going to do this today. And it just came down to a moment. The kids had a special event and they didn't want me there. And all these things were piling up. I remember my mom, I think, must have had the little kids. I was driving all by myself, and the tears just come and you can't stop them. And I'm thinking, if I just turn my car into the tree, it can be all over.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, oh my goodness, I physically took my hands off the wheel because I thought, don't do that. And I needed just for a second, take the hands off. And so when I got home, nobody was around, no kids were around. And it was like the release of all the years all the unmet expectations, all of the bitterness and the resentment that had built up just let out. And I had a counselor's name at that time, but I hadn't called to make the appointment. So the next day I made sure to do that. And man, the healing, it's been so great. I'm a completely different person. I have said to my friends who live back where we lived, I've said, man, I don't even know how you liked me. Like, I was so full of bitterness. They say, well, you probably see yourself a little differently than we saw you. But yeah, but they have. I've talked, even friends that I haven't seen and I've just talked to on the phone, they're like, wow, you sound really good. And the joy that has been given to me is a joy that I've never experienced in life. So
wow. So I have kind of two follow-up questions to this story. One, I'm wondering how your husband handled this and how you, like, did it affect your marriage? Did it affect your relationship with him when all of this took place? Because I could imagine that there even could potentially be some blaming going on. Maybe that's just in my own head, but I could imagine that you might have felt like this was his fault because of that altercation that resulted in the dismissal.
yeah, my husband is such a man of integrity. And I am not an ideal wife or model wife. There have definitely been things that I have blamed him for, but his integrity in this, it stands. His character is just so rock solid. As an umpire, this is just a small but very real example. As an umpire, he faced a lot of stressful, angry people, and he never responded in anger. He always kept his cool. I know community members that were also elders that would not keep their cool just watching the game, And so his character stands. And when we found out about this particular email and what it said in it, he said, man, I wonder who hurt her in her past that she had to lash out this way.
Wow.
I remember, I was shocked. I said, well, that is not what I'm thinking right now. I'm glad you can think that. Like, this was 4 days after it happens. And I'm like, you are crazy, man. So again, his character has just been upstanding. And I think the greatest lesson we have learned through it is letting the Lord defend. Jesus walked to the cross and he didn't say a word. And that's actually what he tells us to do in the New Testament. If your enemy slaps you on one cheek, turn and let him slap you on the other. I mean, do not be easily provoked to anger. I mean, that's the character of my husband. And so just trusting that it feels painful. It is painful. It is terrible. We've had definite consequences with our children. We have our children in counseling. So there's a lot of fallout from it. But the Lord is redeeming it. And he is working beautiful, beautiful things that would have never happened had we have stayed there. Maybe never, maybe I shouldn't say never, but would have happened in a delayed fashion or different. Yeah. So for me, I have never been tempted to blame him because I've seen how he's responded. And I think for me, I didn't lose something that I valued. So a lot of women are hurt because their friends are taken away or their home is taken away. I never felt at home in that church. I never felt accepted in that church. I didn't have close relationships in that church. So what was taken from me was the expectation that church leaders need to behave this way. The expectation that everybody that's a church leader has God's best at heart. That's not a real expectation.
Yeah.
I also have walked through my expectations in terms of probably what was instilled in me growing up and hurt that was unresolved from my own experience being 13. I've walked through that now, and I can see how some of the expectations that I had just regarding what a church should look like or act like, come from there. And that's from a wounded place. And so holding that up in light of scripture and in light of God's word and saying what's true here and what's not, communication. My husband and I, communication's always been a struggle. And so he actually did agree to go to couples counseling. So I was in individual counseling and couples counseling and just kind of soaking it all in for a while, which was really, it was needed and it was good. And so that has helped us learn how to communicate better. If the Lord puts us back into ministry, full-time pastoral ministry, we will serve so much more with greater health now.
Yeah. So my other follow-up to that is you mentioned this idea, I think, of just like expectations, the expectations that we have going into ministry. You think you're going to just be serving God and working alongside of other people who are also serving God, and it's going to be just one big happy family, right?
Yeah.
And obviously, you've found that's not the case. You mentioned counseling as a step that you took, but are there other things that you did to start experiencing the healing from the unmet expectations and the disappointment and really the devastation that your family went through?
Yeah. So I have a whole list of things that I have made the steps to do, and I think they're really important. One thing that was key for me, and I think a lot of leaders struggle with it, is out of the desire to live in service for others, you don't create healthy boundaries. So healthy boundaries were the first thing that needed to be put into place. And for me, that actually meant saying yes to things that I held high value on, but had set aside thinking they didn't match someone else's preference in my family. A super simple example of that is healthy eating. And it sounds really ridiculous now, but for me, the first step that my counselor had me take was, after listening to me just overflow with all this garbage, she just looked at me and she said, I think you need to go home. I just want you to make one healthy meal this week that you enjoy. Don't ask anybody else what they want to eat. You just make this one meal that you want to have for you. And I cried when I ate that meal. I mean, you can hear emotion in my voice now because I had let even what we were eating be dictated by everybody else in my family. And, there's 8 of us. There's 7 other people to always be thinking about their needs. And I had just foolishly let all of their needs crowd in, thinking that I was being selfless. And that's not what being selfless is, So learning to put boundaries up that are good. So, you know what? It's okay. I can take 30 minutes to exercise a day, and you 6 children can wait. I mean, it sounds ridiculous on just hearing it on the front side of it. But the reality of doing that and making that something that is a part of your life is challenging, especially for women. I think it's challenging for any servant-hearted person. So I started attending really to my whole person needs, my physical needs. I didn't even know, actually, becoming aware of what my needs were was a huge part of that. I remember standing in the room. We've been in like 4 different houses now since just the last 2.5 years, and I said out loud, I'm human.
Yeah.
And then I said, I'm human. Like, I said it twice. And I just let that sink into me. It's okay to have needs. We are needy. We are people. We are human. And for a lot of women, especially go-getter women, we're going to do this. We're going to make it happen. That's difficult to admit. So admitting I had needs, becoming aware of what they were, very specific. I have 4 very core specific needs to my personality, my build. Learning that takes a process. And I have a note. I have a sticky note. I keep it on my desk so I see it every day. My core needs. And I know that if I'm not regularly meeting those, Am I going to meet them all every day? No. But if I have long extended periods of time of not meeting several of those, I know I'm going to run into problems.
Mm. So I love that sort of journey that you shared with us about not even really sort of knowing what your needs were. And I have a follow-up question to that. I'm wondering, like, as you were shelving all of your needs and doing it from what you thought was a selfless perspective, how did that affect your relationship with God? Because I feel like some of that, we feel like we're doing it for Him, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in turn, that sometimes really has an effect on our actual relationship with Him. Rather, it's not about the relationship anymore. It's how we're performing for Him. So if you're comfortable, I'd love to hear your thought on that.
Yeah, well, I think that I became very embittered to God,
Yeah.
honestly. That's actually, I'm glad you used that word shelved. I often, when I speak about it now, and actually I've designed a course, and the course is called Unwrapping Your Gifts. And that's what it's from, is I had realized that I had put all of these things that were part of Kristen, that were part of who I was, values I had, and dreams I had, and gifts and skills that I had. And I'd put them in a box and I'd put them away in the attic. And I said, that doesn't really fit here. I guess I don't fit. Somehow I've got to change who I am to fit these roles God has called me to. And yeah, at first you think you're doing it out of love for God and you're denying yourself, right? And then you become very bitter because now I'm confused. I think confused was first. I'm confused, God. How does this match up? I thought this was how you made me, and I thought maybe I could use it here. Have I gotten this wrong the whole time? So you feel the shame of not doing something or being something right or enough. And then it just moves to bitterness because you can only not live out of yourself for so long, right? When your values and things that are so important to you, you're going to find rub. And I think the only result is bitterness and resentment. And so eventually it was like my fist was so tight around everything. Nobody was doing anything I wanted them to. So my expectations for my vertical relationships were sky high. My expectations for my relationship with the Lord was way up here. And everybody's making me mad, or I'm frustrated at everybody. And yet I'm confused and hurt, right? So I was reading the word, I was trying to pray, but even in that, it was like, am I doing this right, God? Are you hearing me or are you not? And then, of course, we had our situation, and I was like, okay, well, you're hearing me, but that was painful. And what do I do now? And so realizing through this healing process that no, I kind of had twisted everything. And through the years, not knowing how to communicate well to my husband, not having some of these skills that you learn of self-awareness and having a good answer to the deny yourself versus attend to your needs. That's a really huge thing for any Christian. It had led to that bitterness. And so the relationship was empty.
Yeah.
And restoring that and seeing, I went and I wrote down, often in my Bible, I will write the date of what I'm reading. And so part of my healing process, probably around month 11 or 12, is I thought, I want to go see what the Lord was saying to me in 2017. And I wrote out, I just found all the verses that had 2017, and I wrote them out. And I started reading them. I wrote them out by date so they'd be in order. And I now call that my trail of peace, because every verse throughout 2017, every section of scripture was 100% related to suffering, to you are my child, to I love you, to all of these pain points that you'd be tempted to say, why, Lord, you must hate me. And it was the complete opposite. And it was also the complete, like, I'm going to do this thing, but you're going to be okay. I have you.
Mm-hmm.
So it's incredible because now I can't wait to spend time with him. And you get a little frustrated if you can't, and that was not the case. I'm just it's one of my things one of my joys that I love to take other women through is, can you watch for God today? Like, what specific thing for just you is he going to do? And in the beginning of trauma and hurt like that, you can't see it. You're physically incapable. But as you heal, you begin to be able to see those things. And I don't like the word God kisses just because I'm a little not, lovey-dovey. I was listening to the Dr. Barbara Lowe episode, and even the mommying, I was like,
yes.
But if you want to call them God kisses, you can, because that's what they are. I say fingerprints of God. Look for the fingerprints of God, and I see them everywhere now. So.
So, oh my goodness, I have so many questions I want to ask you. I'm like, how am I going to fit this all in? But I want to go back to what you just said about the tension between deny yourself and like, you have needs, you have gifts, you have passions, those things that you had put on the shelf that really you wanted to do, but you thought you shouldn't because it's not spiritual, maybe.
Right.
How, maybe if you can just summarize for us, how have you been able to reconcile that tension for yourself?
I think I'm still reconciling it. I want to reconcile it scripturally. And so I'm in the process right now of studying that out.
Okay.
Scripturally.
Yeah.
But I do think there's little things. Make yourself a healthy meal that you like the taste of. I went back and I told my counselor with tears in my eyes, I said, I don't think I've tasted food in about 7 years. And that's the honest truth.
Yeah.
Now, did my husband ever tell me, don't make this meal? No. I just did it thinking, well, this is what he likes. And my husband is not a lord over type of guy. He was born and raised in Iowa, so meat and potatoes is what he likes. And I'm like, I love Chinese. I love Mexican. And so I think spices, spices were not in our house. So learning to take those little things, they're little. Just make a meal for yourself. I love essential oils. Honestly, I had packed my essentials oils up. I had put them away because numerous people in my family had laughed at me when I bring them out. Mm-hmm. I have never considered myself someone who, if you ask a friend of mine to describe me, you're going to get bold, not intimidated. And so I think it's ironic that I chose to do some of these things that were really so small. So again, I made myself a meal, and the next week I brought my essential oils out and I made a special shelf for them, and I use my essential oils without shame because I like them. So what? And so I think a lot of times if we paid attention to some of those smaller things, then we wouldn't, you're going to have big things arise, right? But I think that mental health and emotional health come in the form sometimes of all the small daily choices that you're making. And I have control over that. So when you think of boundaries, it's what do I need? What do I have control over? Take care of that. And the word, I don't often do a word for the year, but a theme that I saw throughout this healing process has been release. Release. There's a scripture, it says entrust yourself to the Lord. I think it's in 1 Peter. And I stayed in 1 Peter and Joseph a lot. If you are going through a trial, that's where you need to be, right? And so it says we can entrust ourselves to our Heavenly Father. And when I think of that word entrust, I think, okay, here I am. Here's my hands. And the first picture my counselor had used when I went to see her was, you've got everything here, and it's like Play-Doh, and Play-Doh's going to come out of your fingers. Ugliness is just going to come out everywhere. And so she had used that picture too, which was just an affirmation of what I felt the Lord was teaching me. is to be open-handed. And I'll tell you, when you live in that place of open-handedness, things are going to happen. This world is a sin-filled world. And so hurt is a part of it. But the Lord is there. He is there. He wants to be right next to us in it. Oftentimes, I think as believers, we think that God's solution is no more pain. That's clearly not scriptural, but somehow we interpret that, and it feels good to think that, but it's just not true. And so learning to be open-handed, not knowing what's going to happen tomorrow. Nobody knows what's going to happen tomorrow. If I have my fist around tomorrow, I'm going to have a really hard time dealing with it. But if I have open hands and I'm saying, okay, Lord, whatever you want, you still plan, you still do things appropriately, but if your hands are open, then whatever he chooses to place in them is a blessing, and whatever he chooses to take away is also a blessing.
I'm sorry, I'm just thinking all of that in and processing because it's really good. If we could talk for just a minute about boundaries. You talked a little bit about boundaries. I'm wondering if you can tell us why you think leaders don't set boundaries, or why they're not even good maybe at enforcing them or realizing that they even need to be there.
Yeah, so I don't know how this translates to all realms. I do know that a lot of pastors, in particular church ministry leaders, feel the expectation of whomever they are, what's the word I'm looking for?
Leading
whomever,
or
who they are leading, but who they are responsible to.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
And so if you're a youth pastor, you feel responsible to your associate pastor, to your senior pastor, to your board, to your teens or the students that you're leading, to their parents. And those groups of people, they have way different expectations.
Yeah.
If you're an associate pastor, you're feeling the stress of senior pastor and the stress of the church board, and then the people that you're serving, their expectations. Again, a lot of times they are in conflict or just different. And so it's almost like, ministry leaders are running to make sure every one of those groups is happy, the pastor, because he knows where he gets his bread and butter, right?
Right.
So I think that's one reason they don't put up proper boundaries.
Yeah.
It seems like, too, that oftentimes the boundary setting is kind of dictated by either what's always been done in the church, if it's been a church that's been around a long time, or by the senior leader of the church. If the senior leader sets the example of having boundaries and not dropping everything every time somebody calls, or things like that, then that can enable the people in other leadership positions to do the same. But if it's the other way around, then it's hard for like an associate pastor to be like, oh, I'm going to have really good boundaries if the senior pastor or the board, whoever is the ultimate decision makers, if they don't do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know for us, that was the struggle. We would have many conversations at home about how we would like to have boundaries in place around a day off or around vacation, just, the cell phone conversation. You need a separate church number, or you need a secretary that everybody's required to call the secretary first. And I think secretaries, man, they are the gold, okay? Yeah. They play such a key part. And I think even sometimes if they would be the ones to say, hey, guys, I think it'd be good if you had a day off and you don't have anybody call you. A lot of times that also can set the tone for the entire staff, right?
Yeah.
And so, that was our struggle, was our practical struggle. And he has said, if I do this, then it's going to make the senior leadership upset because they don't do it, or it's going to make him feel like I'm trying to do something better than him, or, we've had these conversations. So that's very true. Very
Yeah.
true.
Yeah. Yeah. And it really just, the whole conversation around boundaries, I'm so passionate about it because I think when they're not there, it's just a recipe for disaster for the organization, but also for the individuals involved, and it just leads to burnout and so many other problems. So, all right. I want to just sort of, as we start to wrap up our conversation, you've shared so much about your journey. And I just want to thank you for being so open and being willing to share, because I'm sure it's not easy to kind of go back and relive some of that. But I'm just thinking about the issue of forgiveness and healing after you're hurt. We all experience hurt in leadership, but especially when it's in church by fellow Christians, that could be especially painful. And you mentioned the episode with Dr. Barbara. One of the things that stood out to me in our conversation with her was when she talked about forgiveness, and that a lot of times we try to forgive before we get angry, before we let ourselves be angry. And I'm just wondering, what has been your experience with that side of things, with the anger and the forgiveness?
Sure. I found that point also equally stand outish. That's not a word, but
I like it.
And I appreciated what she did. She was talking about her course that she's created, and very wise to put forgiveness lower in the process. It is not that it's less important. It's that your mind, especially with trauma, I was diagnosed with basically like PTSD. I had PTSD issues from previous. There were I had been held at gunpoint in a bank robbery, and then 9 months later had our home broken into. So those were the wounds. Those were part of my wounds that I carried with me and had been unaddressed until all of this as well. And it's very true that your brain cannot process forgiveness without going through some of these other steps first. And so that was the last piece. I went through life coach certification with Elisa Pulliam. I love her. And I had a session with her last fall, and I had mentioned there were 3 people in our previous church that when I would walk by them had started to look the other way. And I did not know why. I did not know what I'd said to them. I would try to take my child into childcare, and if one of those people were in there, they would turn their back physically on me and ignore that I was standing there.
Wow.
And that was really impactful. That was such rejection. I didn't know what I did. We had several different conversations, my husband and I, about, well, maybe you just need to go talk to them. Maybe, but I was so taken aback. I didn't know how to approach that. And they weren't safe people. Learning a lot about safe people right now. I knew that that conversation wasn't probably safe there. So that's why I ultimately didn't broach it then. But Lisa Pulliam, she said, go back. These ladies, I think you need to do a little forgiveness work there. And so for me, that looked very practically like 36 hours by myself. It was such a gift from my husband. And it was the final anger moment, the final, I said, I need it. I love writing down. I love journaling. I don't often do it because of craziness of life, but I knew that for me, that's one of the most healing things I can do. And so I thought, I'm going to sit down and I'm just going to write out every single offense I can remember ever. Okay. That sounds really overwhelming. And I thought I was going to be there for hours doing it. I wrote down 3 things, and then I just cried. And I heard Jesus say, I've already paid for that. And it was that simple. For me, it was that simple. It's not always that simple. But I can now think about these ladies. I can wish them well. I would be willing to sit down with some of them and have coffee. Now, they're not going to become my best friends, but I don't have the emotional reaction thinking about them that I used to. And that was the moment that joy returned to me.
That's so beautiful. Yeah, thank you so much for talking about that, because I think forgiveness is so misunderstood when it comes to how we actually do it. So I think that's so vital. One of the final things that I would love for you to just touch on is, and I would love your thoughts on this very practically, about how churches can handle hiring and firing differently. What are the really solid things that we can encourage our boards, our church families, our bodies in how to do this well, so that pastors' families don't necessarily experience the fallout and the devastation that you went through and that so many families have had to deal with? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Sure, that's an entire other episode.
Yes, it is. I do know that.
But the very short end that I think it can all be summarized in is that a church would do well to consider their hire as a bride or as a groom, whatever you want to say. I realize the church is the bride of Christ, okay, but if it were treated like a marriage where you learn to communicate, where you learn to work out some of the personality kinks, the church would do really well. In working with Deanna a little bit with Pastors Hope Network, I talked with her yesterday. I wanted to know if there were any stats, like what kind of evidence do we have? And of course, there's some other places that you can look. I know Tom Rainer's really good. And she said across the board, it doesn't matter denomination, the percentage is about 30% of pastors that will experience some type of forced resignation or termination, and at least once. So if you have 3 pastors in a room, at least one of them is going to experience it. That's a really high number. And I think that it is a really big disservice to the bride of Christ. I know without a doubt that it hurts the heart of Jesus. I know our own experience. We had somebody that my husband had been working with, sharing the gospel for several years. They'd started coming to him for some counseling, and they said, "What's going on? I don't understand this. This isn't what a church is supposed to do." What do you think their view of Christ was now? Well, there's another thing, and so I just think that the way we're doing it, something's missing. The communication, learning to grow together, learning to work through what oftentimes is personality and preference stuff. If I got rid of my husband the first time he made me mad, or the first time he yelled, or the first time I found out he did something sinful, no one would ever be married, you know? And if our marriage is supposed to be a picture of Jesus's love, how much more so the people who are working together in the body of Christ. And this is why part of my passion is all of the leadership on the board needs to be healthy. All of them need to be working together to have their own individual emotional, mental, spiritual health, because then, and only then, can they operate together as a team well and with humility and with the characteristics that Christ wants us to work together as, so that's a short answer.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that conversation around this whole issue could be an entirely separate episode. Maybe we'll have to do that someday, but
maybe it's a whole podcast.
A whole separate podcast. But I do think that it boils down to what you just said, that it's the health of the leadership team, whoever makes up that team, that impacts how that process is going to go. Because I would say that I think there are times when someone does need to be let go, if there is a real ongoing issue, or, there are times, and we've talked about that a little bit on the podcast around failings in leadership and things like that. But a lot of times it can be worked out if it's handled in a healthy way.
Yeah. And even in, when you do, there are definitely times that you need to let go, but there's a better way to walk that process as well.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, I know we've got to wrap up, but we would love to have you just share if there's any kind of thing that we didn't cover in our conversation that you would want to share specifically with a leader who might be hurting right now, someone who is walking a difficult experience of unmet expectations. If there's one thing you'd want to leave them with.
In the place of hurt, I think it's most important to know and be assured that even though you can't feel it and you often can't see it, that you are still his child, that you are still loved, that he is right there with you.
Mm-hmm. So important.
That's the only thing Jesus had in the end when he was in the garden. His friends had all left him. Not all of them had betrayed him, but had left him, and he just had his heavenly Father. So he knows exactly what that's like. So rather than the temptation of turning away from God and saying, he must not exist, or he doesn't care about me then, to actually lean in to him. And it's okay if you don't know what to pray, and it's okay if you just cry. Like, he will take your tears. That is worship, that is honoring to him. He doesn't have expectations or a list of, this is the way you respond to your hurt. You have to do it this way. So he's ready, and he is right there in the pain with you.
So this, I think, conversation has been probably very helpful in ministering to a lot of our listeners. And I'd love for you to tell people how they can connect with you, or if you have anything you'd like to share with them, if they feel like they need or want to go deeper on any of this, or they feel like they might need to sort of have what you're talking about, someone to kind of walk them through this. So.
Sure. So you can find me online, theministrywifecoach.com. I'm that on Facebook. I'm that on Instagram. You can message me. I'm Kristen Joy at theministrywife.com, so you can email me. There isn't a week that goes by that I am not hearing from at least one, usually multiple women walking through some kind of pain in their journey, whether it's leadership or not. That's the best way to connect to me. And then I'm always happy to set up a time to meet with anybody without cost for the initial. And then I can point them to the right place, whatever the need actually is, and be able to meet that a little bit more on an individual basis.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kristen, for being with us and for sharing your story with us.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
Hi, friend. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast. We're so glad you took the time out of your day to listen, and I truly hope that it made an impact on your ability to lead well. If it did, would you consider sharing this episode with a friend? You could take a screenshot of the episode and share it on your social media, maybe an Instagram story or on Facebook, or you could just text the link to a friend. We would truly appreciate that, as when you share with a friend, it helps spread the word about the podcast, and it helps more women to be able to be impacted so that they can lead and love others well. Now, don't forget, your leadership matters, and it's time for you to embrace your gifts and lead with confidence.